Have you ever made a decision and felt entirely confident it was your own, only to realize later that you might have been, well, gently nudged in that direction? It's a pretty fascinating question about the illusion of free will. Do we actually make our own choices, or is someone else quietly pulling the strings behind the curtain? So let's just dive right into this. In this explainer, we're going to explore a really comprehensive breakdown of the hidden mechanics of influence. We'll be decoding a highly curated manual, Lama Fayyad's 250 Techniques of Psychological Manipulation. This source material compiles some incredibly raw, unapologetic strategies, covering everything from reciprocity and deception to social engineering and behavioral triggers. It's the ultimate playbook for gaining power and controlling social dynamics. And look, we aren't here to judge these tactics. We're just here to decode them impartially so you can understand the silent games being played around you every single day. Think about when you roll a pair of dice. It feels like pure chance, right? But to a master manipulator, literally nothing is left to chance. They engineer these seemingly random situations to control their targets. The source text outlines how absolutely every interaction can be stacked in the manipulator's favor, creating this powerful illusion. The target feels like they are completely in control of their choices, while the outcome, that was actually predetermined from the very beginning. It's really about taking the chaotic, unpredictable dice roll of human interaction and turning it into a highly calculated science. All right, let's kick off our breakdown with Section 1, the art of deception and gathering intelligence. Because before you can even think about influencing someone, you have to set the board. According to the text, the foundational step of literally any strategy is gathering intelligence covertly, all while maintaining this completely deceptive, friendly front. Rule 1 advises secretly gathering information on everyone, and I mean everyone, enemies and allies alike, just in case they eventually turn against you. Trust in this particular framework is treated as a massive liability. Under Rule 2, they even suggest testing allies by having spies approach them pretending to work for the enemy. Just imagine a coworker floating a fake, juicy rumor to see if you'll immediately spread it around the office. If your ally takes the bait, boom, you know they can't be trusted. The baseline assumption here, which is outlined in Rules 5 and 6, is almost clinical. Question absolutely everything. And if you can't be 100% sure someone is telling you the truth, well, it's safest to just operate on the assumption that they are actively lying to you. The underlying philosophy of this whole section is actually summed up perfectly in Rule 3, which states that fear is the life insurance policy. This reveals a deeply Machiavellian undercurrent to the playbook. The text argues that, sure, it's nice for allies to respect and like you, but it is absolutely essential that they know exactly what happens to those who cross or betray you. It's not about winning a popularity contest. It's about engineering this subtle, ever-present fear of consequences to guarantee unwavering loyalty. Moving right along into Section 2, the power of the reciprocity rule. This is where the psychology gets incredibly practical. We're looking at how everyday gifts and seemingly innocent favors get weaponized to create deep, binding social debts. It builds this deliberate negotiation pipeline using Rules 13, 14, and 15. A manipulator rarely just asks directly for what they actually want. First, they use the classic door-in-the-face technique. They hit you with a massive, unrealistic request that they fully expect you to reject. Imagine a vendor asking for some astronomical price they know you'll laugh at. But why do it? Because when they immediately follow up with their actual, much smaller request, suddenly it seems incredibly reasonable by comparison. You feel relieved, so you agree. But of course it doesn't stop there. Once you've agreed to the small task, they use the foot-in-the-door technique. They follow up later with a slightly larger request, capitalizing on your newly established momentum of saying yes. In this framework, your initial rejection was actually factored right into the ultimate acceptance. Furthermore, the source explains exactly how to mathematically increase a target's internal sense of obligation. If a manipulator gives you a gift, Rule 8 says they will frame it as highly exclusive. They might whisper, "Hey, this is just for you, don't tell anyone else in the department." Then, Rule 9 says they'll make a favor appear incredibly costly or time-consuming, maybe claiming it took them days to prep that data for you. By adding this heavy illusion of high cost and exclusivity, your psychological debt just skyrockets. When the manipulator finally needs something in return, as Rule 10 points out, they strategically call in that heavily inflated past favor. And to guarantee you comply, Rule 15 suggests they offer to do a tiny part of the task themselves, projecting this illusion of goodwill. They might ask you to organize a massive corporate event, but offer to, handle buying the morning coffee. It makes it feel like a shared team effort, when in reality, you are doing all the heavy lifting. Okay, that brings us to Section 3, choice engineering and decision manipulation. This is all about how choices are carefully curated to bypass critical thinking. There is a really fascinating juxtaposition here between Rule 32 and Rule 33. If you want someone to act, you give them precise, highly limited options. For example, asking a client, should we meet at 8 p.m. or 9:30 p.m., forces a decision between those two specific times. It entirely bypasses the core question of whether they even want to meet with you at all. It drastically accelerates compliance. On the flip side, what if a manipulator wants to stall a target or stop them from taking action? They use Rule 33, offering way too many choices. Giving someone an overwhelming number of options causes decision paralysis, ensuring they get frustrated and ultimately do absolutely nothing. The text also provides a rapid-fire list of environmental and behavioral triggers that drastically boost compliance without the target ever noticing. For instance, Rule 16 relies on one simple word, because. Giving any reason for a request, even a really weak one, triggers automatic compliance in the human brain, even if the reason is just because I need to. Think about someone cutting a line at the office copier just by saying, hey, can I go first because I really need to make copies? It works surprisingly often. Rule 20 notes a biological element. Never pitch a crucial idea to a hungry person. Take them to lunch first. Full stomachs literally make people significantly more agreeable. And Rules 21 and 22, they exploit the flaws of human memory. People primarily remember the beginning and the very end of an event. So if a manipulator needs to slip in unfavorable information or extract a sensitive detail, they just bury it right in the middle of a long, casual conversation where it's almost instantly forgotten. And then we have the boldest tactic in this entire section, Rule 30, the assumptive close. This is where the manipulator completely skips the negotiation phase. Instead of asking for permission, they just act as if the target has already enthusiastically agreed to the terms. A salesperson might confidently say, great, I'll come over tomorrow to set up the new system. What time works best? By projecting total, unquestionable confidence that the deal is already done, the target often just falls in line, almost too bewildered to even pump the brakes. Now, things take a definitely more aggressive turn in Section 4, dominance and psychological intimidation tactics. This is where the explainer delves into the darker arts of projecting sheer, unyielding power and intentionally inducing insecurity in others. It requires a highly militaristic approach to social dynamics. The source material frames interpersonal relationships not as collaborative, mutually beneficial things, but as literal battlegrounds where dominance has to be constantly asserted. It's about wearing an armor of authority that makes others instinctively submit to your will before a single word is even spoken. One of the most unnerving physical tactics detailed here is Rule 131. When a manipulator wants to assert pure dominance during a conversation, they won't look the target directly in the eyes. No, instead, they will stare silently and intently at the target's forehead or hairline. Objectively speaking, this is a highly effective way to trigger deep-seated physical insecurities and just completely throw someone off their game. Because the target expects standard reciprocal eye contact, right? Staring just an inch higher creates this creeping subconscious feeling that something is physically wrong with them. It totally shatters their focus and puts them right on the defensive. Which leads us to a very stark binary view of human nature presented in Rule 132. Those who cannot be bought can be intimidated. Very few resist both. It's a fascinating, if bleak, psychological perspective. For the manipulator, if charm, exclusive gifts, and the rules of reciprocity completely fail to buy a target's loyalty, well, psychological intimidation is the ultimate fallback plan. Everyone, according to this strict rule, has a breaking point that can be reached through either greed or fear. So, to maintain this aura of untouchable dominance, a manipulator will publicly preach virtues and high morals to restrict their competitors, while secretly breaking those exact same rules to advance their own agenda. And if they're ever challenged, they rely heavily on absolute emotional control. Rule 40 dictates never showing anger or visible upset, because reacting emotionally signals weakness to anyone watching. If someone makes a joke at your expense in a group setting, Rule 42 says you don't laugh it off, and you certainly don't get mad. You just stare silently at the person until the joke literally dies in the air, completely stripping them of their social power. Finally, they use the halo effect described in Rule 43. They wear highly elegant, pristine clothing to weaponize their external appearance, ensuring people subconsciously attribute positive, authoritative qualities to them right off the bat. Let's conclude our thematic breakdown by looking at Section 5, controlling the opposition smartly. Because even with all these tactics in play, you will face threats. Rule 134 presents a highly counterintuitive strategy for dealing with enemies. Rather than going to all-out war and trying to crush a rebellion entirely, which carries a massive risk of failure, a A master manipulator will subtly guide and utilize the opposition. They maneuver the dissenting voices to inadvertently support causes that actually serve the manipulator's own ultimate long-term goals. It's really about absorbing the momentum of your enemies rather than blocking it, sort of like a martial artist using an opponent's own charging weight and energy against them. When it comes to direct institutional power, the source is remarkably clear. Rule 107 advises actively winning the favor of judges, law enforcement, and regulators, ensuring the heavy scales of systemic power always tip in your favor. Rule 108 pairs right with this. Always stay just half a step ahead of those institutions by exploiting obscure legal loopholes. But in the realm of social power and public perception, the tactics shift entirely. Rule 109 shows how to instantly ruin a rival's credibility. You don't even bother debating their points logically. You destabilize them with heavy, stigmatizing labels. You casually call them creepy or disgusting, visceral words that absolutely no one wants to be associated with. And through every single one of these interactions, Rule 111 states you must always operate from a position of apparent abundance. Because if people truly believe you need absolutely nothing from them, they will, paradoxically, offer you everything. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, peeling back the layers on how reciprocity, manufactured choices, and pure dominance can be engineered. These 250 rules from Lama Fayyad reveal a highly calculated, almost mechanical view of human interaction. So now that you've seen the playbook and you know the subtle triggers that force compliance or induce deep insecurity, take a moment to reflect. Think about your everyday life, your office dynamics, or your negotiations with salespeople. Knowing all of this, who truly held the power in your last interaction? And more importantly, who's going to hold it in your next one? Keep learning, stay observant, and I'll see you in the next explainer.